Hey guys, so this will be our final lesson for the year, and this lesson is going to be a little different than our previous lessons. Our previous lessons have been pre-planned out and presented a little more presentationally on like how you do a green screen, how you do a rotoscope, things like that. But many times when you're given a job or something like that, After Effects is a tool, and you have to problem solve different tasks that are given to you with your tool. And so today is going to be a little bit about that. So it can look a little bit different when you're trying to figure out and solve problems with After Effects. And so usually you'll have an idea of what you want to make, and then you're trying to figure out how to make that with After Effects. Today I don't even know what I'm going to make, so you would usually at least know that much. But I want to show you just a little bit of how you get in, you try different effects, and as you get to know some of the effects, you can start making some educated guesses as you go along. But for right now, we're just going to go ahead and just jump in and play around a little bit. So first thing is we need to make a new composition. And I'm going to go down and I'm going to choose this HD TV 1080. Okay. Or we could also type these in. So 1920 by 1080 square pixels. That all looks good. Resolution, we can always just change that here, right? So full, half. I'll leave it at half for now. It kind of just helps things run a little quicker. Okay. I would also encourage you to make your folders, but I'm just going to go ahead and dive right in. So we're in our composition, and let's at least rename this. Call it final. Okay. And we're in our final composition. Let's go ahead and add a new layer. So let's click down here. Layer, new, and solid. Okay. And let's call this fractal. And so inside After Effects, you'll see if you go to Noise and Grain, there's a fractal noise, and you can make all sorts of different effects with the fractal noise. So if I go ahead and select that, you'll see that we get this noise type of effect. One of the things we could do, right, we have a bunch of different types, so we'll look at that. But I did want to show you this too. So if you contrast this really high, and then you take the brightness way down, and then we'll push something like that, and then we need to take our transform. That's the other thing we need to do. We need to take our transform. So if you open up transform, you'll see this scale, and you can bring it all the way back to like 1 or something like that. And then here you could start to play around with your contrast and brightness to essentially get like a little bit of a star field. If you need these to read a little bit better, you could maybe bring up the scale size a bit. You don't want to do too much, but you could bring it up a little bit, and you could kind of start to get like some of these star fields and things like that. Okay, so right off the bat, right, you can do stuff like that where you start making some interesting effects like that. Let's go ahead and reset this. Play around with this a little bit more. You can also play with if you come to scaling, you do have this uniform scale. You can play with that too, and so we could bring this down something like that where it's like super skinny, and something like this, and you can play around with your contrast, your brightness, and then we could even do something like we come down here to fractal. And again, I'm just kind of messing around as we're doing this. Like none of this has been pre-thought out. So I'm going to unlock the scale, and I'm just going to squish that in a little bit. Okay. Maybe take the height up even a little bit more. Around with some of that. Okay. And then the interesting thing, now that you've built stuff like that, you could go ahead and change like the type and see like what that does to your look. Maybe it does something good, maybe not. But you can kind of play around with some of this sort of stuff too and see like, well, how does that how does that change my look? And really, it doesn't seem to be changing it too much. So we'll just go back to basic. The other thing we have down here is if you see this evolution, if you click and drag, you can actually evolve that. And you do have a stopwatch, so you could set a keyframe, and then you can come over all the way over here, change this, set another keyframe, and you have an animation. The other thing you can do with these stopwatches is you can add an expression, right? So if you just click this, just regularly click this, you'll drop a keyframe, right? And you're kind of in key mode. But if you hold the Alt key and you click on the stopwatch, oops, let's try that again. Alt and click on it. It'll bring you down here to like the expression for the evolution. So you could do like something like time, and we'll do like 90. Something like that. Or let's try this again. Time star 90. So not time parentheses 90, do time and then star, which for me is shift 8, and then 90. Okay, answer. There we go. And so now if we play through this, you can see we're getting an animation on that. Okay, which is kind of interesting. Now, if we did something where we took this and we did, say, like a layer and a pre-compose, we want to move all attributes. We got this fractal comp. Now we've got that all baked down inside of this composition. So then we could come in here and do some interesting stuff. So if we did a distort, and maybe we'll try a mesh warp. So the mesh warp, we can change our grid a little bit. So this could be interesting. Maybe we'll try this at 3. Okay. Columns. Yeah. Okay. I think I just wasn't seeing it because they're actually falling right on these lines. Okay. So once you have something like that, one thing is you can start to like distort. Oops, don't want to do that. I just want to make sure we're getting just our yeah. And so when you move these things around, you do have like these little things like that too, so you can kind of curve the flow of things. Maybe we like really push this side or something. Okay, and so again, this has not been pre-planned out or anything like that. So I'm just trying different things. You can just seeing how it looks, and so this is just kind of where you can start to play around with different effects and yeah. Take that, kind of smooth that out. So essentially I'm just kind of trying to smooth some of these lines out a little bit, just so we get some decent flow and it doesn't look too choppy. Keeps looking like there's a line there, but there is not. Okay. So we can smooth some of this out. Cool. And I can shrink some of this. Oops. All right, cool. And so, again, you can play around with this and do all sorts of, fun different things with the mesh warp. But I think you kind of get the gist that you can start to then have some interesting effects, and then you could blow this up and colorize it. So if you went to your curves, and so I just dropped the curves on here, and I'll just go to the red channel. You can start to pull some, red out, maybe put in a little extra blue, and then maybe you do, like a little bit of glow or something like that on here. And then with the glow, you can play with like radius and intensity, right? So you can start to, and then also the threshold and stuff like that. And you can kind of start playing around with that a little bit, right? And then with that sort of stuff, you still have this, oops, to effect. You still have this original mesh warp that you can kind of still go in and play with. So maybe we'll push this even more. Why not? And then, yeah, so we can kind of play with some of this and get some really interesting type of effects. That's the one thing that kind of drives me a little crazy about the mesh warp, is it tends to, like, you're always kind of trying to grab it, and it tends to grab the footage in the back a little bit, stuff like that. But that just kind of is what it is. Maybe we'll grab this one, pull that out. So this is just about playing around with effects and trying to get something that you feel looks kind of interesting. Maybe we can kind of play with that. And so I think you can start to see like how you can play around with things. Go back to the mesh warp. And let's just straighten some of this out. Yeah. Maybe we'll squish some of this internal stuff. And if you notice, right, if this quality is too low, you start getting some of this jaggy stuff. So you can turn that quality up to 10, and it'll kind of help out with some of that and smooth some of that out. But if things are lagging, you can always drop that quality and just kind of play with the overall effect. And then when you're done, you just turn that up, and it'll give you kind of a better distortion effect. So again, I'm not really designing anything here, more or less just kind of playing with things, just trying to show you some things that you can do, and then to give you some ideas. So, okay, so there's that. Okay. Let's do this. Let's go ahead and just delete that. And let's make another solid. So layer new and solid. We'll call this fractal as well. Oh, we're still playing down here. And let's go to effect, noise and grain, and fractal noise. Cool. And so this time, let's play around with linear, soft linear. Okay. So let's take some of this complexity down. And so I'm just kind of looking at some things that we've got. So I'm just taking that complexity down just to smooth some of that out. Let's open up our transform and scale that up a little bit. Maybe something like this. Okay. And then again, let's add a evolution. So I'm going to alt click on that, and we'll do time, shift 8, and we'll do 90 again. So time times 90. Okay. And now if we play, we get something like that. And actually, let's make that a little bit slower. So I'm going to click back on this, and let's put it at half that speed. Maybe, oops. Time star. Let's do 40. So we'll go a little under half. So we'll do time times 40. Yeah. All right, cool. So from here, let's go ahead and pre-compose this again. So we'll do layer. So get this layer selected, and we'll go to layer and pre-compose. We'll come down here, make sure move all is fractal comp 2. That's fine. Okay. And so then the next thing we want is we want this selected, and then we want to go to effect. And then also don't forget that you can come over here and click on effects and presets if you know what you're looking for. So like I know that I want CC glass. That's kind of where I was thinking of going. And so again, none of this is planned out. It's just I'm just kind of playing around with things and trying different ideas out. So I'm gonna take this CC glass. I can drop it here, or I can drop it here. If you have a bunch of things in here and it's hard to get it on what you're after, then you might want to come down here and select layer. But at this point, I'm just going to drop that effect, and you can kind of see what that did a little bit. So we got our CC glass here. I'm going to take down that softness a little bit, and let's push that height a little bit more. Displacement. Same thing with that. So you can see that it's almost giving us like a little bit of a sense of depth. Okay, so we can play around with all this. Softness. Alright, cool. Under light, we do have like this effect light, and so if we click on that, we could change this to, like, it's just giving it a general light right now, but we could do AE light, and we could add an After Effects light. So if we go to layer, new, and then we go to light, and let's make this a point light, okay? And for the color, we can set a color on this. So maybe we do like a dark blue or something. All right, cool. And so now you can see if I move this light around, and actually, if I open up the light options down here too, it'll give us some like light intensity. Fall off and radius, I don't know that it'll hit this too much. Since this is just a single layer, this kind of stuff tends to work if you have more like 2.5D kind of layers. Same thing with kind of shadows and stuff. So yeah, it didn't really seem to be affecting it too much. Yeah. Okay, so oops. One thing you can do, like if you don't want to move this comp around, right, and you can see that I'm trying to click that light and I'm like, oops, I'm moving that comp. If I come down and I click on this comp, see this little lock, and if I come straight down, you'll see that I can lock this layer. So now I can't move that layer at all. Okay, and then you can always unlock it. Okay, but since this is little and I keep moving that layer, I'll just do that. Okay, cool. So I think you can kind of get the sense that this can do some interesting stuff. And maybe let's change this to like a red or something like that. And so you can move this light in or out too. Okay, so if you do something like that, this kind of effect. Now another thing you can do too, let's move that back in so we kind of get a little more stuff like that. Let's add another light. So you could do layer, new light. We'll make another light. Maybe we'll make this one blue. And so that can be kind of interesting. If we make a third light, let's try something. Layer, new, do another light. Let's make this one. Let's kind of go with like an orange. Okay. If we come to our light options for this, you can actually take this intensity down to like, even negative, right? And so you can kind of play around with how these different lights like interact with each other. Okay, maybe over here and up. Do something like that. And then for light 2, let's go to our light options for light 2. Just bring down, play around with that intensity. Okay. Alright, cool. So now if we play through this, you can see we're getting some kind of interesting, kind of this weird kind of gelatin kind of thing. Again, this is like obviously abstract. But yeah, I mean, this is just kind of how you go about just playing with ideas and trying out different things and seeing what you can get. So let's stop that. The fun thing also to think about, I'm going to unlock this fractal comp, is we still have in here the fractal that is driving all that. And we can change that and then it'll change this look. Now, if I dive into the fractal comp, right, I lose my final view. So if I come back over here and I click on final, that'll get me here. But what if I want to work in fractal comp 2 where I'm making changes, but I want to see this? So the way we can do that is if you come up here and you see this little lock, let me click on that little lock. If you double click on fractal comp 2, it's still going to take you in there. Okay, but you can see now that there's like an option for this over here, right? So we can click back on this, and now we can click back and forth down here, and we're still going to keep the same view. When you're done with that, you can always come back up here and unlock that. But I'm going to keep that locked for the moment, and I'm going to come to fractal comp 2, and then we could play. So that's turbulent sharp. So we could play with turbulent basic. Turbulent smooth. We could try all sorts of different stuff. We do need to go back over here to preview that. It's kind of interesting. Okay. Oops. Click back on that, and then back over here. Okay, so we tried swirly. We could look at rocky. That's kind of cool, right? You kind of get like this edge kind of effect. Cloudy. Terrain. And again, we could go in and change all the parameters and things like that. But yeah, that's kind of interesting too. Right, we could come in here and we could really dial back brightness and things like that to see, you know, as we change some of that. So we can keep changing that. But I'm just kind of going through and just seeing what some of these other ones look like. Kind of cool. Okay. Oops. Here and here. So strings, and then we'll just look at threads. And what does threads look like? This kind of looks neat in the sense of it almost feels like some of these are closer and some of these are kind of coming from like off in the distance or something like that. Let's come back here. Take down or take this brightness up a little bit. Oops, take it back down a little bit. Okay, back to final, and then I'm just hitting my space bar, but again, just remember you can come over here and press the play button there or stop it there too. So I'm just looking at like what different things look like. All right, cool. So I'm going to unlock this. So I want to show you a couple other things that you can do. So if you come back to the fractal comp, and let's select this fractal comp and let's duplicate it. There's some other things that we could play around with too, like on this. And so if we go to, so we've got two of the same thing, right? So now on this top fractal comp, let's go up to Effect, and let's go to Blur and Sharpen, and let's go to like CC Vector Blur. So with CC Vector Blur, I think you can kind of see what that's starting to do. So I'm going to turn the eyeball off for that one. Well, it's not really making a difference, so we can leave it on. All right, so we can do some of this. Now we do have the type, so we could change that to constant length. Okay. We could change it to perpendicular. We could change it to direction center. Okay. Or direction fading. And so, like, this is a totally different look than that. So now if we come back to our final, what does that look like? And so maybe we increase our softness, right? Because those edges were getting too hard. So now we could play around with our softness and see how that looks and feels. Okay. And also our height. And let's play around with some of this. So the types of things that you can make with After Effects are really like limitless, right? You can, and all I've done here is play around with the fractal noise and thrown some different type of effects on top of that, right? So I haven't even done just a whole bunch of stuff, right? But it's something that you can play around with and get some interesting different effects, right? And so I could sit down and, like, if I sat down and did all the same stuff again, I would probably come up with something completely different, right? And so I'm just going to dive back in here, and I just want to see, like, what would happen, like, if I play with some of these overlays. So if I did a screen, or you can come through here and you can kind of start to mix these with all this. Now I could go through and, like, click one at a time, or if I hold shift and plus, I can kind of dial down through this a little bit quicker. So I think you can kind of see how you can go around and, like, mix these in different ways, and, like, what does that look like? And then shift minus just goes back the other direction. And so one thing you want to be careful of is getting things too bright. Like, if they get too bright, they'll clip out on this effect. Oops. Actually, that doesn't look too bad. But if it gets too bright, you'll see, like, this kind of clipping, like this hit like a piece of glass, and it just stopped. Now that could be the effect that you're going for, so that could be cool too. But yeah, so that's kind of looking interesting. So now if we come to back here, and we go to the amount, what does this look like as we increase that amount? So maybe we did, if we had something like that, how does that then affect this? And then we can kind of play around with our height again. Kind of playing through this again just to see kind of the overall effect. Again, this is very abstract in nature, and yeah, I get that. So, but the point is like, I just wanted you to kind of demonstrate what it looks like to go in and play with different looks and of different things, and just show you a couple of the effects. But ultimately, there's like a ton of effects, right? So if you go in here, you can start to get into distort and play around with all these distorts. Generate, play around with the generates, stylize, get in here and play with the stylize. Particle systems, we haven't even really touched bases on that, but that could be something fun to play with, right? So this can be something cool to just kind of get in and just start playing with effects and start mixing them to come up with your own effect, right? So you can almost think of it like as a cook, right? You have a bunch of ingredients, and you can make a ton of different things based off of how you mix those ingredients, okay? Cool. Another thing that we could kind of play around with, so let's do an effect. Let's go to Distort, and there's this effect. Again, play with all of these. So ideas are just kind of hitting me to check different things out. And so as you kind of get used to what some of these do, then you can be like, oh, hey, I wonder what this would look like if I did this, right? And so it may not work out, and you may trash it, but that's okay, right? You just want to kind of come in here and try different things. So I'm going to do this optics compensation on top of everything. And you can see what this optics compensation is doing is it's kind of wrapping the whole effect kind of in on itself, right? And so now you could have something like that, okay? Or you could even move that ahead of the CC glass or whatever. Okay, so I'm going to leave that like that. The other thing you have in here is you have this reverse lens distortion. And so if you check that box, I think you can kind of get a sense of what this is doing now, right? And so if I pull that real hard, right, it's going to do this kind of stuff. And this can be like kind of fun for like fly-throughs and things like that. Cool. Okay. And so I'm going to try one other thing. So I'm going to duplicate this fractal comp down here by doing Control D as in dog. And let's go to blur and sharpen. And let's look at the radial blur real quick. I just want to look at this. And so you have this radial blur that you can see essentially what that is doing, right? And this gives you an idea over here too. And so you could like mix this. You know, maybe that's a screen over the other one. Or an overlay. Right, and so there's a bunch of different stuff you could do on that one. The other thing, you don't just have to spin this, okay? If you change this from spin, you could also do a zoom. So if we increase that, and then we can change the center of where that zoom is. So we could pull this like here, or like down here. You can kind of see it's doing something interesting like that. And then we could change this to, again, maybe a screen. Let's I'm going to do the Shift plus again and just kind of dive through some of this. And then I'll just take mental notes, like that lighter color was kind of interesting. Shift plus. That's kind of interesting, the difference. Okay. And again, I had, none of this planned out, right? I'm just trying out different things and combining them and just seeing like, what does it look like? That's kind of interesting like that. I kind of almost like that one. Okay. And so maybe from here we could come up here and do like a layer, new, adjustment layer. And the reason why I clicked up there is because I wanted it up there, right? You could have your adjustment layer anywhere. And whatever effect you put on your adjustment layer is only going to affect what's below the adjustment layer. So I wanted it at the top so that it affects everything. And so from here, I'm going to do an effect. We could play around with the color correction and our curves. But there is also this lumetri color. So we could play around a little bit with that. And so if we come in here, we have basics. You can upload lookup tables and things of that nature. Oops. Let's come to our color wheels. And so I can kind of click and drag, like for my midtones where I want some of this stuff at. And so I could come up with different color schemes or different things of that nature. So maybe we'll go with our midtones like red, and then let's see what this would look like if we do our shadows and highlights a little more on the blue side. Okay, and then we need to obviously contrast this a little bit. So I'm going to add the curves in here. And then you do have, okay, so on these lookup tables, and I'll try to remember to also send you guys something on this on like making your own. But they do have some like presets, different lookup tables. So we could also for different cameras and things like that. So we could just try some of these different lookup tables and see how they work with our particular piece of footage. It's kind of interesting. Maybe we'll go a little more with this contrasty type one. Okay, and so from here, I kind of feel like we're kind of starting to lose some of that glass type of effect. So let's take these two fractal comps, and I'm going to shift select those so I get them both selected. Then I'm going to do a layer and pre-compose that. And we'll call this fractal flat. Okay, and now you can see like we lost some of that stuff. So if this little icon right here, if we come and we click on this, that should pull that back in, and that didn't quite do what I was hoping it would do. Okay, so let's do this real quick. So let's go to this right here, and let's just add another curves on here. Let's kind of contrast some of this down again. We can add some reds here. Change this to our blues. I'm just going to click right there to add a dot. I'm going to pull some of that up right there. And I'm going to pull this green down just a hair. And I'm going to grab the bottom part of the blue and pull that back up so we can kind of rebuild some of that a little bit. Okay, cool. Change that on and off. Okay, so it's all working. Okay, so let's, with this selected, let's go to Effect, and let's do our Distort. And let's add on here again a, oh, where is it? Let's, or it might be under, for CC glass. There we go. So CC glass, and so we can add that CC glass on here again. Okay. And so here we can do play around with our softness and our height. And I know why we lost that coloring, that original coloring, because our point lights probably should have pre-composed those in here. We could see if we could copy these. So I'm going to do Control C, go back in here, and Control V as in Victor. Yeah, it gets that back. And we'll go back in here. Cool. And so we don't need these point lights anymore. Okay. I'm going to click back on this fractal comp, and I'm going to play around with some of this a little bit. The softness, our height, and here I'm going to go to lighting again, right? So we had created originally all these on our CC glass, and that's what I just did a second ago, right? We had these AE lights, and those were these, right? So if we turn those lights off, we kind of lose all that coloring that we had done way back when. And so I just copied those lights back in here into our fractal final comp, okay? And so I'm going to do the same thing here, where I'm going to, on our CC glass, I'm going to add an AE light. And so then I'm going to do layer, new, and we'll go to light. Make that a red, and we'll do, okay. And so here, let's open up that light effect again. We'll play around with some of that intensity. We can kind of get the sense of something like this again. Okay, and then so that's our light. Let's go back to our fractal final and play around with our height. Let's make some of that a little sharper, just a little bit. We can play around with the softness, but we do want some of that height. We haven't really played around with the shading yet. We want to increase that specular quite a bit. Cool. All right, cool. And so I'm going to move these kind of in that order. From here, if I look at some of this, I'm just turning off some of these effects because sometimes I like what the effects are doing and sometimes I don't. So I'm just kind of trying some of that out and seeing what I like and what I don't. So let's do this. Let's duplicate this fractal final. And I'm going to go turn off the effects for this layer on the bottom and this layer on the top. We can have that on. And so then from here we'll do this effect and we'll do like let's try color dodge, and then let's do Shift plus again. I'm just kind of going through this, seeing if there's anything in particular that I really like. Maybe that saturation looks kind of good. And so we could even have something like this, right, where we're getting this cool kind of depth kind of feel. And then here, if I click T for opacity, I could then kind of start to dial that in, like how intense that is, so that we don't lose like everything, but we can kind of mix the two. Okay. Okay. So this is kind of looking kind of interesting. And then I'm going to try one last thing, and then we'll probably call it good. On the adjustment layer, I'm going to go to Effect, and let's look for. I'm looking for our CC light rays, and so let's just come over here and type that in here. Effects and presets. So we'll do CC light rays, and we'll just see if how this works. And so I'm just going to drag and drop this on our adjustment layer. And you can see that we can even start to add some interesting stuff along with this. So we'll do radius. Maybe we'll change that to screen transfer mode so it's not. So I'm just playing around with some of this. We'll do square, see what that looks like. We'll go back to round. Source. Brightening. And we got that set to screen. And so something like that could be kind of interesting as well. And so you can essentially make like light rays out of this, right? But I'm going to push this out a little bit. Bring down that intensity some, because it's really kind of blowing out at the beginning here. And then maybe we also throw in a glow on top of all this. And do kind of get a radius. Not too intense. Cool. And then you can just, again, turn different things on and off and just see kind of what you're thinking, and you can try different effects and just kind of get the results that you're after. So I just threw down a curves, and I just threw this little bit of S contrast on there. The other thing, like if you're ever looking for ways on how to build like a vignette, you can always drop a solid to layer new solid, and then you can make this black, and then okay, and then just have the black on top of everything, and then you can come up here to our rectangle tool, click and hold, get the ellipse tool on there, and then with the ellipse tool right there, then we can just double click it. Okay, it drops a black circle, and so for our mask for a black solid, we can just change that to from add to subtract, and now it's doing just the edges. And then on our mask, if we open that up, we have that feather option, and so we can feather that so that we kind of just get this kind of sense of depth. And so if like I turn that on and off, you can see that it's just darkening the edges. And then you can play around with like your mask on how much you want that. And then you could also take that expansion, like if you want to push that in a little bit more, you could totally do that. And so essentially here is, just playing around and trying different things. And so you can see like this effect evolved quite a bit as we were playing around. And not that all this later stuff that we did is necessarily what you want. Maybe you would want something like that, or whatever the case may be. Okay, so we're going to try one last idea. And so right underneath the black solid, I want to go ahead and add a new fractal. So I'm going to do layer, new, solid. Okay, we're going to call this fractal. Okay, and so I want the fractal right beneath the black solid. And so we're just going to go to Effect, Noise Grain, and Fractal Noise. All right, cool. And then what I want to do is I want to take this Ellipse tool, and I just want to drag a circle right around the center here. So I've got that little center. And so if I hold Shift, right, it's going to make a perfect circle. But if I hold Control and Shift, it's going to, like, instead of like dragging like from start to end where my mouse is, if I hold Shift, it'll just kind of keep it growing from the center out, if that makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to do something like that. And let's change this to dynamic. And let's take that transform, scale that up, do a bit of contrast, take some of that brightness down, just so that we get something like that. And we can play around a little bit more with this. But let's go with something like that. And again, let's do an evolution. So I'm going to alt click that stopwatch, and I'm going to do time, Shift 8 to get the star, and we'll do 40 again. Okay, we'll just click off. Let's also soften that mask. So let's come over here and click on our main selection tool. And on our mask, let's just click the fractal and click F. And that'll bring up our feather. And so I'm just going to feather that out a bit. Cool. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pre-compose this. So I'm going to do a layer and pre-compose. So just pre-composing that fractal. We do want to move everything, so we're going to just say OK. Cool. And let's add a CC light rays to this. And let's take this, that center right, the light rays, and let's drop it right here in the middle. And let's increase our intensity. Maybe something like that. Or softness. Okay. And then from here, let's change our mode to, let's go ahead and do add. And then let's go ahead and add a little color to the fractal comp. So let's do effect, color correction, and curves. And let's just add a little bit of blue. And we'll take some of that blue and then maybe also some red. Okay. Let's just see how this is looking. Okay. So I'm not wanting to see too much of detailing here, so I'm going to dive into my fractal comp and click on this, and let's blur this. So it's just added an effect, blur and sharpen, and a Gaussian blur. So we're just going to blur that a bit to something like that. We'll come back to our final, and we'll see how that's feeling. So now if we turn that on and off. Okay, and maybe we blurred that a little bit too much, so maybe we'll bring that down to like a 10. And then in our transform, let's bring that scale up to something like that. Back to final and see how that's looking. Okay, so essentially that's all I've got for you guys. I just wanted to kind of get in here and show you guys how to just kind of play around with the tools. And yeah, this was a very abstract effect. You know, I had no real plan as far as like what I was going to try to build, but I just kind of wanted to get in here and show you how you can just start playing around with the tools and just trying to come up with different, you know, different looks and different styles, and learn how to use it as a tool and not so much like it can only be used for like green screen or rotoscoping and things like that, right? You can build different things with it. So anyways, I hope this has been helpful, and yeah,